Okay, welcome to Gephi. This is what you will see when you first open the program. You'll see the splash screen and then the actual Gephi program behind it. I'm going to close this splash screen and we'll work through it like normal. Now I'm actually going to load the LinkedIn network that we created when we did the assignment 3 data setup. So to do that, I'm going to go to File and then Open. I'm opening this because our LinkedIn network was an undirected network. We used the open method to load an undirected network. This is the edgeless.csv. I just click open, and now I get the import report. From the import report, I can see the number of nodes and the number of edges that are in the graph. It'll tell me if there are any issues, right? Nothing happened. Everything looks good here. So I click OK. So now we're in Gephi. This is the Overview tab. Inside the Overview tab for this workspace, I can control the appearance of the graph here. I can manage its layout here. This is the actual graph pane. We see the network, right? We can interact with it. We can move a node just by clicking and dragging. And we can see that these nodes are connected, right, with edges to other nodes. On this other side here, we have the context and then the statistics pane. This is all the overview, right? Up at the top, there's these two other panes. If you click one, it'll switch essentially the pane. So if I click Data Laboratory, this is now my data table. Data table shows you the raw text data that composes your graph. So right here, you can see inside data table, I'm on nodes. These are the IDs and the label of all of my nodes. I could add a column, merge columns, clear columns using these buttons at the bottom, right? And then if I switch to edges right here, I can see that these are all of the listed edges within my data. You can do operations from here, so you could essentially sort the edge by the name, something like that. You can try and filter them. I don't have an attribute here that would make sense to filter with, but this is an Excel-like interface to view your data. And then when you switch to the preview pane, this is how you actually set up your graph for export, okay? So data laboratory is where you handle essentially attributes of the graph. If you want to add something like a categorical or numerical variable, if you want to edit something, right? And then overview is where we manipulate the graph itself. Now, something to be aware of, right, is that at times you could possibly be missing one of these panes, right? So if I get rid of graph here, you would see there's no graph, right? This frequently can happen with graph or with data laboratory. If you ever don't see one of these panes, right, just go up to the top on Window, and then you click whichever one you're missing. So with graph, right, now I have graph appearing. If I was in data laboratory and I was missing this data table, right, Window, data table, I get it right back. So if you're ever missing one of these panes, you can get it back to your main Gephi window by going to Window, right? It could also be that you've undocked it or floated a window, right, something like that. That's how you get any window back to Gephi if you're missing it. Okay, so now let's focus in on actually directly controlling our graph. So to click and drag on a node, that's actually this hand symbol over here, right? I can click, drag, anything like that. If I need to move around or reposition the graph, I hold down the control key and then I move the mouse. That allows you to move the graph around the screen, right? You can also just do the mouse selection here, right? You can't move if you're on the actual arrow, but it will highlight things. This is good if you want to look at specific relationships with nodes, but you don't want to upset the layout that you have, right? The box will let you select more than one node at a time. For the most part, you're in this hand section here. These are other ways that you can actually interact with the graph, looking at paths or trying to add a node or add an edge, Really, the most useful one for individual interrogation is at the bottom here, right? This mouse marker with a question mark is actually whenever you go and click on a node, click on it, it'll pop up in this right-hand box the attributes of that node. It'll tell you its ID, label, any other information, as well as where it is. So that's if you want to actually look at that, okay? So when you import a graph, it actually looks, well, like a giant blob. You can't tell anything about it. So to actually make this look pretty, one thing that we need to do is we need to change the layout. So we go to the layout pane, and the first thing you'll notice is that there's a number of layouts. One of the questions is which layout is right for my graph? The answer is unsatisfying. It's that you have no idea. These layouts are essentially different algorithms that try to lay out your graph in the best way possible. Two that are relatively good are Force Atlas and Fruchterman-Reingold. So Fruchterman-Reingold will actually turn your graph into a circular display. It'll try to move everything out into kind of a circle, moving nodes based on how their relationship is. To run this, you can just click Run, and you can see it start to move and try to separate the nodes. I'm going to stop here. Always make sure to stop a layout algorithm. It consumes resources. And you can see that the graph has kind of moved in position, right? We can recenter at any time just by clicking on this magnifying glass. Now we've got some space to work with. So this is an okay representation for our data. If I change the gravity, which is how much the nodes are attracted to each other, if I decrease it, it should help them spread out a bit more. So that looks a little bit better, right? And so you can see that there's this strongly connected group here and there's this strongly connected group here, right? If you don't actually get a good layout, make sure to play with all of these different numbers here. So if you increase the area, that's how big the circle is. You see it's giant now. Gravity is how tightly compacted all of the nodes will be. Speed is just how fast it runs. The faster it runs, the sloppier it gets in its calculations. Another layout that's good is actually using the Force Atlas. This one works a bit different. It doesn't restrict things to be circular, right? And so if I run this, you can see lots of things are brought together. And now I can see that these two groups right here form separate components, right? One thing that I'll want to do is I'm going to want this to be spaced out a bit more. This is pretty tight when we zoom in and how close these nodes are. So to do that with this, I'm going to increase the repulsion strength. That essentially means how much each node pushes away all the other nodes near it. So I'm going to change this from 200 to maybe say 1,000. And now I'll run it again, and we can see that there's a bit better separation. I'm going to click Stop. So this is good. But I've definitely had some problems with this group and that group being moved very far away. So I can move the entire group back by using this hand. So right now I can only choose one, but I can configure how big my hand should be. So I click Configure here, I increase the diameter. My diameter of the hand tool is much larger. I'm now selecting this entire group. I just click, and I can drag it back near my main network. Drag that one over here, okay? And I can do the same with this. Now I'm gonna move this back down to 1 so I'm not grabbing the entire graph, and then I can just recenter again, right? We can zoom in. So this is pretty interesting. It's moved these two groups right here further apart, and I can kind of see that there's one strongly connected node across a number of groups all the way across right here. So this is overall a good layout, right? I might move this group in a little bit more though, so let me change my configure. Okay. And then switch that back. Perfect. So one thing that's interesting, right, is always to look at who's going to be the most connected. And so to do that, I might run the average degree here, And now I can see the degree distribution. So if someone has a very large number of connections, right? Most of the people in my network have very few connections to the others in my network, right? And now what I'll want to do is I'll actually want to change this using the appearance. I want to size each node visually, right? To see who's very well connected and who isn't within my network. So to do that, I want to apply this to the nodes. I need to change their appearance, right? So I go to the appearance pane, and this is the size symbol here, right? I'm on nodes, and I want to change the size of the nodes, and I want to change them according to an attribute, the degree or the number of connections. So once I'm in attribute, I can just choose that it's the degree I want to size it by. I can say the min size is 10, the max size is 50, and just apply it. So now if we zoom in, we can see, I have some very well connected nodes here, right? There's a number of them that I want to look at. So what I can do is I'll turn on all the labels. To do that, down here at the bottom, just click on this T symbol. That turns on all of the labels, and I control the label sizing with this slider that's right to the right of the box where it says what font is being used. Now that's pretty hard to read. All of these labels are overlapping. So one thing that I'll do is I'll use another layout. I'm going to switch to the label adjust layout. What this does is it moves nodes around to essentially try to make it so the labels don't overlap, right? And so now we can see that one very well-connected person in my network is Adam Hockenberry. This is a coworker of mine. He was in the same graduate lab as me, and in that lab we were essentially a part of the chemical and engineering department, but we were also biologists, right? So you can see that his connections are spanning this group of chemical engineers that's in the bottom, and then all of these biologists up in the top, right? Same thing with Peter Winter, which is another coworker. And then over here, right, we have my partner who's actually connected to both people that I've worked with and also people that I'm friends with, which is all of these groups up at the top. These connections are a bit messy, right, when we have the labels on, so I'll turn that off. But now we can see. If we were interested in ranking people, we could easily do that by going to the data laboratory, clicking on nodes, right? And then we could sort by degree. So the people with the highest degree in my network are essentially people that I worked with during graduate school. Those are the most people that I know because we were all in graduate school together, and as scientists, we don't typically use LinkedIn. I know that's funny, but it's true, right? So you could go and sort there and see who has the most, who has the least. Now, the other thing that we're interested in for this assignment, right, is essentially how many groups there are. To identify kind of communities, we're interested in using the modularity. So from the statistics panel, you can run that here. So randomize, use weights, everything's okay with the default, click OK. And you'll get a report here. This will tell you the number of communities and it'll tell you the modularity. This actual modularity number isn't very important so long as it's greater than 0. But you can see here I have 8 communities. We can close this. And modularity is a categorical variable, right? There's groups, there's a certain number of them. And so when we have a categorical variable, it makes sense to show that with color. So to change the appearance of the nodes, the colors, right? We go back to the appearance, nodes, but now we go to palette. This controls the color of a node. We want to use an attribute, which is the modularity class. So we can go to modularity class. And you can see that it has the 8 groups listed. By default, this color palette isn't the most amazing. You can change the palette by clicking on palette and going to generate, right? I have 8 groups, so I say that there should be 8 colors. And I could change that to something like fancy and then click generate, and it'll make this color set that's more in sync with itself, right? You could use any of these. Some work better than others, right? This doesn't work very well, purple line for my purposes. I'm just going to go with fancy, click OK. Oh, forgot to click generate. There we go. And then I can apply this. And now we can see that there's some very distinct groups that form, right? So if I turn up the edge width here, it's a little bit easier to see. That's this slider that's to the left of the fonts, right? So it's very easy to see which are the groups by their coloring. And I can turn this down again. And let me turn on the text, and we can see what we have here. So basically I have one disconnected component up in the left, right? These are all of the people that I worked with after I left graduate school. It's all at one company. They all know each other, but they don't know anyone else in my network. Down in this left-hand corner, I have another disconnected component. That's all of the students that I've met while teaching at Kellogg. In this main graph here, we can see that there's really three primary groups. There's everyone from essentially the biology program, so a large number of biologists that I know. Over here, we have people in the chemical engineering department. And here we have my direct coworkers. These are the people that I actually worked with. So you can see the split. They're very close because everyone I worked with, we were all situated inside chemical engineering, right? But you can see that our relationships are much tighter, more connected to each other than we are to the rest of people that were dispersed over chemical engineering. And then when we get out to here, this is everyone I went to college and high school with, right? All connected to each other. And then this is everyone that I'm actually essentially friends with, but also professionally connected to on LinkedIn in Chicago. What ties these people together? They all ride bicycles, right? And so through essentially some bridges, right? Some friends that I have that connect across, that's what binds these groups to essentially my real professional network. And then down here is from a little bit of time I spent in Toronto. So I can turn these labels off, right? And this is looking pretty good as a network. If I wanted to do some kind of analysis or add something to it, right? In the data laboratory, I could export the node table, add something to it, and then re-import it back as I've detailed in the big book of Gephi, right? But for now, we don't need to do that. Right. So the last step is always just trying to get this image out, and to do that, you can go to preview. So when you go to preview, typically you won't see an image at first, right? If you're missing this preview pane, make sure to go to window and then preview. But to get something to show up, you typically will click refresh. Now, if you don't see your entire network, make sure to click the reset zoom, and that'll put it into perspective. Okay. You could change the background if you wanted, right? Over here, you can change the presets. Each of the presets, right, have a different way to display information. Some are better than others. So this is the default curved. It displays everyone's node name. This is very busy. It actually doesn't work as a graphic at all. This isn't that good, right? You could say the default straight suffers from the same problems, right? But you can always change how any one of these is by messing with it over here. So in node labels, you could always unclick show labels and then click refresh, and suddenly our labels are gone, but we still get to keep all of the curved edges, right? You can customize this however you want. It's up to you, but you should definitely focus on trying to produce an image that's readable. Whoop, sorry, zoomed in there. Let me reset the zoom. Okay. And then from here, you can always export final images by going export, SVG, PDF, PNG, right? You can save this on your desktop. You can change if it's PDF, PNG, or SVG by changing the file format here. This is my LinkedIn network. Okay, just save it. And now I could go to my desktop, and we see that I have the image here. So that is the basics of working with Gephi. At any time, you can save all of your work, right, by going to File, and then save. And this will save it as a Gephi file. A Gephi file differs from your original network because it actually maintains all of the layout, color, and appearance size changes that you've made, right? This is a good way to actually keep track of all your work and what you've done. So if I were to close Gephi here, I can save the changes. You can see I have my Gephi file. If I go back to opening Gephi, right, I could just go to File, Open, go to my desktop, and then here is my Gephi file. You can see it's loaded the entire network. It's kept all the sizing and colors. It has all the statistics that I've run all right there. So while you're working with these files, always make sure to save it as a Gephi file. That saves a lot of headaches. And with that, this is the basic primer on how to use Gephi. Have fun, play around, try to learn, right? This is actually a beautiful way to visualize and analyze network data. So just enjoy it while you're doing it.